So, Christina, it's great to connect with you. Where are you in the world right now?
Hi, Rhett. It's so awesome to be here. We are in Raja Ampat in Indonesia, and we're doing a number of very interesting stories here.
And so you're diving on a regular basis?
Yes, we're doing a lot of diving, a lot of drone flying. We're doing a lot of visits with the community and local organizations. I think there's no better way of understanding the realities of conservation than having boots in the ground and being here to tell the story.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. So I wanted to jump in and ask you just a few questions to follow up on our written interview. And you already answered these, of course, but I think it's nice to hear from you personally as well. So what originally inspired your interest in nature and why did you become a photographer?
It's such an interesting question because I have always been inspired by nature. I don't think there's ever been a moment in my life when I didn't think that nature was incredibly interesting, mysterious, majestic, and as you become older and you understand more, the foundation of all life on earth. So I've always been interested, and I do think it comes to parenting and schooling. I think every child is interested in nature, and it gets beaten out of us by the school system and by parents who are afraid of bugs and creatures that they don't understand. But I was very lucky. I had parents that allowed me to get dirty and play with critters. And, I think that's what fosters this connection to the planet that gives us life.
And why did you decide to become a photographer?
Because I could tell from a young age. I don't know if you remember a book that came out in the 1980s. It was called The Population Bomb by Paul Ehrlich. And it scared me so much, what Paul was saying, that by the 2000s we were going to be overpopulated and people were going to be starving. And of course, he got a lot of things wrong because we had the food revolution, that the agricultural miracles that allow us to feed a lot of people. But I think at the time we were not as aware as we are now of how serious climate was going to become so quickly. And I thought that science was going to be a good way for me to contribute to the understanding of why protecting wild nature is so important. And what I have found over the years, Red, that continues to puzzle me to this day is people just glaze over. It's like you're talking about a luxury, that doesn't affect most people. I don't understand where we went wrong, that most societies don't understand our reliance on healthy nature to survive and thrive. So science didn't work. You spend so much time writing scientific papers, collaborating on peer-reviewed publications, you know that. And then very few people react to it. So I discovered photography by accident, and it was very clear to me very early on that people really feel comfortable asking questions about photographs in a way that they don't feel comfortable asking questions about a scientific paper. And I think it's that initial dialogue that is so important. People just asking you questions. Where was that? Were you afraid? What kind of animal is that? It's the first step, really, to bridge the conversation.
Yeah, and so on that front, you're kind of opening a new conversation with this book that you've just published called Hope. And hope really embodies optimism amid these great environmental challenges we're facing. So how did you balance conveying the urgency of conservation with the uplifting tone of the book?
It's such a great question. I struggle with that. And the last thing I want to do is convey a false sense of hope, because a lot of days I find myself wondering, if we're going to make it. But I think it is an important tool in our emotional toolkit as conservationists and as humans to find reasons for hope. I, who I think about? I think about that movie Braveheart, when he's in the field and he's going against a much bigger army and he knows he's probably going to get killed, but he doesn't sit around to cry and dwell on the potential misery. He rallies the troops and he inspires everybody to give it their all. And I think that's our job as artists and photographers, to shed a light and share with the world that there are still magical spots on our planet. There's still so much good that we can protect, and there are still incredible creatures that share this planet with us. It's worth the effort of conservation. So, I mean, that's where I find my hope.
So you've described photography as a tool for conservation. Can you talk about a specific moment where one of your photographs directly impacted a conservation effort?
Yeah, I'm going to take you back to the time when I was working for Conservation International. And when you work for these large organizations, you realize that there's a lot of expertise for policy and science, and a lot of people that have big budgets to do that kind of work. But when it comes to communications, it almost always is an afterthought. And so I was working for CI at the time in the communications department, and looking at the overall budget dedicated to communications, and it was less than 4% of the overall budget. And 90% of that was for fundraising, communications for fundraising. And I thought, you know what? The plot of the story is being lost because we are not spending at scale to inform the people of just how critical and urgent the situation is. And I started taking pictures just because I had the camera and I had an opportunity, but I quickly realized that they had a very huge impact in the way that people understand our world. One of the most impactful photographs that I've made was a photograph of a starving polar bear that we made in northern Canada. And I had no idea, Rhett, that this photograph was going to go viral when we posted it on social media. I mean, I don't think anybody can guess those things, but we were very poorly prepared for it. And when it started going viral, people had a number of interesting reactions. A lot of people wrote saying that they were devastated, that they could barely get out of bed, feeling so much empathy for this creature. A lot of people, like, you start getting an understanding of how little they know about the world, asking silly questions like, why didn't you feed the bear? You know, like, well, I don't carry 40 pounds of seal meat in my backpack. And then there was a third group of people that started creating doubt and misinformation and denialism. And all of a sudden, these pseudo experts starting popping up in the regular newspapers to basically call us fake news. And when you start finding where the money to fund those pseudo expertise comes from, you know, it is a little scary. It comes from the Heritage Foundation, from right wing, from the fossil fuel industry. And of course, you know, they're investing a lot of money in keeping their side of the story, you know, front of mind and telling people what they think people need to know about nature. So it became very clear to me that as conservationists, we need to invest a lot more in communications. And I have to say, Mongabay is one of the few outlets out there that does this really well.
Well, thank you. That's very nice. Very nice to say. So over the course of your career, you've taken countless photos, obviously. Um, Given that massive database of images and all the experiences you've had over that period, how did you decide which stories and images to include in Hope?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I was starting my career as a photographer, I had a very important decision to make. You can focus your lens on the devastation and show people the horrors of what's happening. And you realize very quickly that people have a very strong emotional reaction, and oftentimes they reject the information. They rather not look at it. So I took a page out of Martin Luther King's speech. You know, he didn't start the famous speech by saying, I have a nightmare. He told us what the dream was and what the aspiration was. And I thought, you know, if with my photographs, I can remind us of why we do this, the kind of planet I would like to live in, and just that there's still all this beauty out there. And if we focus on that, maybe we will get there. So for Hope, I was imagining that a spaceship was visiting us from another galaxy. And if they didn't know anything about our planet, what would I want them to know? And I would want them to know that on this planet, indigenous people were the original ecologists, the original economists. They managed the resources for thousands of years, and they still have a lot of knowledge. I also want to share that the ocean is the largest and the most important, the defining ecosystem on this planet. And we have neglected it because we don't understand it and we're afraid of it, and it's so difficult to explore. So oceans are so important. And then just the building blocks of life on Earth, all these creatures, they are our fellow passengers on our own spaceship. We don't know the role that they play, and we treat them like something to be exploited instead of understood, celebrated, and protected. So I just wanted to elevate, the way that I see our planet and our role as humans here. We're so ignorant. We know nothing about how our spaceship works.
So I just have two more questions for you. So the next one is, what role do you think visual storytelling plays in shaping our relationship with nature?
Nature is so mysterious. And like I said, even we know a lot, but we know nothing. And I think that visual storytelling, photography, filmmaking is a way of bringing it to the living rooms of people that don't get the same opportunities that we do to spend time and in awe of nature. And photography in particular does something really interesting. Whereas filmmaking and video kind of like goes through your brain in one side, out the other, photography has the ability to become part of your consciousness. And we collectively remember photographic moments in our humanity's history. If I say to you, Napalm, Vietnam, you know exactly which photograph I'm talking about. If I say Che Guevara, you know exactly which photograph I'm talking about. So, as photographers, we strive to make those iconic photographic moments for the collective memory of humanity. And, I'm sitting here in this little bay surrounded by jungle and in a beautiful ocean ecosystem. This is the kind of planet I want to live in.
Yeah, so I mean, you pretty much touched on this. My last question is really around eco-anxiety and inspiring action. So, how do you think photography can help people overcome what can often be like this crushing eco-anxiety and then, empower people to take action?
I think the question that I get asked the most often is, what can I do? And most people feel this helplessness, and they're pretty certain that their small actions do not account to much. So photography for me is a gateway to invite people into a variety of ways that they can have impact. And for me, it is about empowering the people in the front lines, the heroes that are holding the avalanche of destruction, working with small budgets in the middle of nowhere, and they need our support. They need to be seen and they need funding. So I use my photography to shine a spotlight on that kind of work because I find it very hopeful and very inspiring. And I think if more people take a moment to see the work and to meet some of these people, they will be inspired and they will feel better. And it helps my anxiety.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with me. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule and, around on the other side of the earth. So, thank you again.
Rhett, thank you for what you do. I think Mongabay is something to be celebrated. You're one of the very few outlets that's fully dedicated to sharing with us what's happening to our spaceship. Thank you.